Welcome everyone to tonight's council meeting for Monday the 24th of June 2019. Can we all stand for the opening prayer and acknowledgement? Thanks. Lord, we ask that you guide us in our decision making, protect us and the community we serve from all that is evil, and strengthen our unity for the welfare of the city. I would like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people as the traditional custodians of the land that we meet upon today, and pay my respects to the elders, both past, present and future, for they hold the memories, culture, tradition and hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that contribute to our community. Thank you. I must inform you that this council meeting is being webcast and recorded. By speaking at the council meeting, you agree to being recorded and webcast. Please ensure that if and when you are speaking at this council meeting, you're respectful to the other people and use appropriate language. AlburyCity accepts no liability for any defamatory or offensive remarks or gestures made during the course of this council meeting. An audio recording will be made for administrative purposes. Conflict of interest declarations received by the Chair. I've received none. Mr Zachnich.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This advice to Council is regard to disclosure of political donations and the requirements of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979. The Act under Section 10.4 requires a person submitting planning applications or submissions regarding a planning application to disclose any reportable political donation and or gifts to any local councillor or employee of council. Reportable political donations include those of or above $1,000. The disclosure statement forms are available at the Council's website or from the Customer Service Centre and must be lodged in accordance with the Act. In dealing with development applications, councillors need to take into account specific matters contained in the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. Accordingly, the provisions of Section 4.151 of that Act are set out in the Council Officer's report detailing issues to be considered. The Local Government Act, Section 375A, requires that a division be called whenever a motion for a planning decision is put at a meeting of the Council. Planning decision means a decision made in the exercise of a function of Council under the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act, including a decision relating to a development application, environmental planning instrument, a development control plan or a development contribution plan under that Act, but not including the making of an order under Division 9.3 Part 9 of that Act. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Zachnich. Apologies, we have a number, CM4. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Doxey.
Mr Mayor, we're having some technical difficulties here with accessing the agenda.
Really?
Yeah, disappeared. Error retrieving file.
Wow. Stand by. Happy to pause the discussion momentarily. We've got them up on the screen. We can start the process.
Some hard copies.
Councillor Doxey, there are hard copies up the back if you want them. Councillor Doxey, we're ready to go.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move the following recommendation that the Council receive, note and accept the apologies of Councillors Glacken, Cameron and King and grant leave of absence for the meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
I'll second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you. There is no mayoral minute. CM6 action plan 6.1 to 6.4. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Vanderven.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move the recommendation the following action plans be received and noted. 1, actions complete for noting only. 2, actions awaiting response from external parties. 3, actions in progress, and 4, long-term issues more than 3 months.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderven, do you wish to speak to that at all?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
There being no questions or debate, I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. We have the confirmation of minutes of the previous meeting held on Tuesday the 11th of June. Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that the minutes of the council meeting held on Tuesday, 11th of June 2019 at 6 p.m. be confirmed.
Thank you. Councillor Stashbury.
Second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, do you wish to speak to that at all?
No, thank you.
There being no further discussion or debate, I'm happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you. We have no reports from community forums. CM9, notices of motion. CM9.1, notice of motion. Councillor Doxey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move the following motion that Albury City congratulates the Honourable Susan Lee, MP, the federal member for Farrer, on her recent election win and acknowledges her appointment as Environment Minister. Albury City looks forward to working with the Minister in delivering on the commitments made for Albury by the Coalition during the election campaign. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury,
Mr Mayor,
you happy to second that?
I wish to apologise for not giving us 2 days' notice in the Border Mail that I'm seconding this motion. I didn't realise that was part of the new Code of Conduct, so without giving you any notice, I am seconding this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. Councillor Doxey, did you wish to open debate on the item?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Are there anyone wishing to speak before me, though?
I've got several questions if you wish to take the questions first.
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have a question through you to Councillor Doxey. Councillor Doxey, it's not stated in your motion, but it was reported in the Border Mail that the reason that you're proposing this motion is to ensure that that the Honourable Susan Lee and the Coalition Government deliver on completing the full diamond interchange at Davey Road. So my question to you is this. Given that Susan Lee has done little or nothing for this area in the last 19 years, do you think that is because we haven't, as a council, formally congratulated her through a motion of her election or re-election?
Councillor Doxey.
Simple answer is no, but I don't believe the points you were raising in relation to having done nothing. My aim is not to be contentious with this. My aim is to take advantage of the fact now that she has been elected to a position where she has the eyes and ears of the Prime Minister. She has the opportunity, now that she's inside the tent, for want of a better word, to work with people that make decisions on behalf of this city. And this is an opportunity I don't think we should miss, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Dox. I have a question from Councillor Con. Councillor Con?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My question is through you to the General Manager, please. To your knowledge, has this council ever formally moved a motion to congratulate an individual politician at another level of government?
Mr Zachnich?
Not in recent times through you, Mr Mayor. We've certainly written directly and extended congratulations, as we have in this instance in recent times, seeking support and ensuring those commitments that were made during the election are indeed followed up and action taken by the through the local member by the government.
Comfortable with that? Mm-hmm. Question, Councillor Vandervan.
Yeah, just to confirm that Mr Zachnich was just telling this council that a letter has gone after the election. So that's what you were just talking about?
That's correct.
Question, Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to Councillor Doxey. I note in your proposed motion that we are also congratulating the Honourable Susan Lee in her appointment as Minister for the Environment. Now, I understand she's replacing. Who's she replacing? Oh, thank you. She's replacing Melissa Price as Environment Minister. Now, so, Councillor Doxey, in view of the Honourable Susan Lee's comments in the newspaper last week that perhaps in regards to the drought, farmers might be able to borrow water from the river in times of need and then perhaps repay the river later on. I guess she's assuming that the river is something like a lending institution because it's got a bank on either side of it. But given that she has replaced, it was Melissa Price, wasn't it? Yeah. Given that she's replaced Melissa Price, do you think that the Honourable Susan Lee has sufficient qualifications or skills to be our Minister for the Environment, or has our Prime Minister merely looked for someone with greater skills and presence than the previous Minister for the Environment?
Councillor Doxey.
Thank you for the question. I don't sit in judgment on the choice of, first off, the electors who elected her. I do not sit in judgment on the Prime Minister's choice. I do not have any knowledge of her qualifications to sit as the Environment Minister. Let's simply place the opportunity before us to take any opportunity we can for the betterment of Albury City. Let's not make judgments based upon what you believe personally. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Doxey. Question from Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have a question through you to Councillor Doxey, if he doesn't mind. Have you publicly supported an election campaign for Susan Lee?
Councillor Doxey.
That's a fair question, Councillor Con. I was out of the country when the election was on. I did not hand out for her. I am not a member of the Liberal Party. And you and I have discussed in the past my voting intentions, and I'm sure you remember that discussion.
Thank you. There being no further questions, Councillor Doxey, just open debate. Oh, one more. Councillor Con.
I have two more questions for Councillor Doxey. One is, if this motion is about Davey Road, why didn't you move a motion about Davey Road? And the follow-up question is, if Council has already written a letter to our new federal member about this, would you consider withdrawing the motion? In my personal view, if that action's already been taken, this looks like showboating.
Councillor Doxey.
Councillor Con, thank you. Can I ask your intention with the word showboating? Is that for me or is that for the honourable member, first off?
Councillor Con.
I suppose to clarify that was directed at yourself.
I'm
Councillor
very
Doxey.
flattered. Thank you very much for that comment. Let's move on to Davey Road, first off. It's not the only thing that was considered during the election campaign, and I'll move to another point in a moment in relation to that. This is not grandstanding by any stretch of the imagination. So if I can move on then, Mr Mayor, please.
Yeah. Yeah, you can speak to the motion now if you like.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Let me first off thank Councillor Suchbury for the opportunity of seconding the motion purely to get some discussion in the chamber. This allows me to put the motion to councillors and to explain my reasoning for putting that motion. Mr Mayor, as reported in the Board of Mail, you are correct. This is the first motion that I have put forward, as some other councillors in the same boat. But I have in the past put forward notices of rescission. This was an opportunity that presented itself by the Honourable Member becoming the Environment Minister and getting access to the Prime Minister. You want me to pause, Mr Mayor, while you have a discussion?
No, that's fine.
Thank you. This motion comes as an opportunity for Albury. This is the right forum, contrary to what some people believe, because urgent business in the past, as fellow councillors know, has been an opportunity for councillors to be ambushed with little time to think about the consequence of the motions. There's nothing worse than at the last minute, towards the end of a meeting, being hit with a motion that no one's had time to think about, and basically we end up being blindsided by it. In the Board of Mail, you mentioned that you had written to the Honourable Member, and I understand that is the case. I haven't seen a copy of the letter, and can I ask you one question, please? Did you indicate to her, more than just the election win, that you congratulated her on the appointment as the Environment Minister?
No, the letter was sent the week of her election, so it wasn't yet determined that she was Environment Minister, but we did congratulate her and indicated we would look forward to working with her as we've always done.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. That's right and proper. And I'm going to assume that earlier in the piece you did the same thing with Mr Clancy.
Yes, that's correct.
Yep, thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Now, I see her appointment as a powerful opportunity for Albury City. Now, turning to the announcements made during the election campaign, we must work closely with the Minister to ensure these commitments are delivered. Now, Davey Road is a very important part of the overall big picture for Albury City at the moment. It offers opportunity for Nexus, but more important from my point of view personally, it opens up the opportunities for the development, the strong development that's taking place in Thaguna Willinga. This, once delivered, will take the pressure off the road network at the moment where we are seeing in some people's minds congestion. So here's an opportunity we should be pursuing as every opportunity we can. Also, there was mention of an aquatic centre for Albury. This might have been mixed up later on with the Albury-Wodonga two cities approach. Can you imagine, from my point of view personally, I'd like to see the aquatic centre in Albury. And the reason I say that is people from Splitters Creek, people from Centaur Park, or from North Lavington are not going to travel all the way across to Wodonga if that was the case for an aquatic centre. There is already a facility in Wodonga, and if the honourable member can, or the Minister, can pursue an opportunity for us to have an aquatic centre in Albury, I'm more than happy and we should pursue that. Last couple of notes, if I may, Mr Mayor.
You're right, yeah.
Now, I asked the Minister to pursue the dollars for this to happen for Albury, because this is vital. In the past, councillors have criticised both the Minister and the local member. This has not been helpful, and I caution fellow councillors to cease this because we need to get some sound opportunities for the city. I ask my fellow councillors to support this motion, or otherwise we are sending the wrong message to the federal government from whom we seek money. The ball is in your court. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Doxey. You have a speaker for and a speaker against. Councillor Stutchby used to speak against the motion.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, I do wish to speak against this motion. This motion is unnecessary. The federal member has been congratulated appropriately in writing, and there's no need for us to go through the effort and debate and voting of a formal motion in order for us to further congratulate her. And I just think that it's a waste of time, and if we need to pass a formal motion to congratulate her in order to prompt her to follow through some of her election promises, then that's a disappointing reflection on her. Now, Councillor Doxey mentions that the very fact that she's been appointed to the ministry could be good for us because she'll have the ear of the Prime Minister being in Cabinet. Well, as we are all aware, the honourable member was previously a minister and had the ear of whichever Prime Minister it was at the time back then. And then she resigned from the ministry over an expenses scandal where she took a taxpayer-funded flight to Queensland to buy an investment apartment. So she's had the ear of the Prime Minister before, and I don't recall us debating any motions on congratulating her on her election win back then. So there seems to be some inconsistency here. In essence, my objection to this motion is purely that it's unnecessary, and also I think that it potentially reflects poorly on either Councillor Doxey's judgment or the honourable member's enthusiasm for carrying through her promises if he believes, Councillor Doxey believes, that we need to formally congratulate her in order to prompt her to carry through some election promises. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stuttery. Speaker 4, Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's one of these ones where if you speak against, what you're saying is I don't congratulate her, so the only reason I'm speaking for is to say congratulations. Quite frankly, I would have to say this is nothing but a stunt. Councillor Doxey's been a councillor for the same period of time as I have, 7.5 years. In that period of time, Susan Lee has been elected 3 times to federal parliament, and never before have we had a motion to congratulate her. So why this time? And I really don't take this rubbish about Davey Road and funding. It's junk. I guess also Mr Clancy might be sitting at home tonight wondering when his congratulatory motion will come, because he hasn't been congratulated either. I do want to emphasise the point that Councillor Stutchbury made. She has been a minister before. She's had the ear of the Prime Minister before. Why is this so important this time? I don't believe this is a way to go about council, and to say that we shouldn't criticise a minister or a politician is rubbish. Every Prime Minister, every councillor in this chamber will be criticised and will have to stand up and bear that criticism. We all know we cop it frequently, and that's part of the job. You get praised for the things you do well, you get criticised for what you do badly. And Susan Lee is no different to anyone else. She works hard, I understand all of that. This motion's unnecessary and, in my opinion, a bit of a stunt. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Speaker against, Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, firstly, it goes without saying that council will always work with the local member of the day and the government of the day. Many people in this room know that Susan Lee and I are on opposite sides of politics, but I appeared with her in the media during the election campaign as acting mayor because that was for the benefit of this council and for this community. So I hope that that's taken into account. Look, in my opinion, this motion is absurdly political. It actually says that AlburyCity looks forward to working on the commitments made for Albury by the coalition. I think that's a bizarre precedent to set for this council. The first half of this motion is completely unnecessary but relatively benign, and I would actually seek an amendment to remove the second half of this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Con. So you're seeking to amend it, or did you wish to wait until the decision of the motion? Before shadowing an amendment, or are you wishing to seek an amendment now?
I'll seek an amendment now to remove the second part of this motion, as that's the section I have the most issue with. Okay,
so you're removing looks forward to working with the Minister and delivering on the commitments made from Albury by the Coalition during the election campaign. Okay, so we're dealing with an amendment now, so you wish to move that? I need a seconder. Councillor Stutchbury.
Yes, I'll second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Con, did you wish to speak to the removal of the amendment that you proposed?
No, thanks. I think I've already spoken to that.
Thank you. There being no further speakers or questions about that amendment, I'm happy to put the amendment, not being the motion. All those in favour? No, she's just moving her amendment. Thank you. So I'm happy to put that amendment. All those in favour? Anyone against? The amendment is 1. So the removal is from looks forward. So what we have left is the motion that Council congratulate the Honorary Susan Lee MP, Federal Minister for Farrer, on her recent election win and acknowledge her appointment to the Minister of Environment. That's it, is it? Correct. Yep. Okay. Excellent. All right. So the amendment has become the motion. So, Councillor Doxey, you did push the original motion. Councillor Con has changed the motion substantially. So I don't. Did you wish to speak to that motion at all, Councillor Doxey? There are no further speakers or questions.
No, I'm happy that we're going to end up with that first part anyway. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll now put the amendment as the motion, and we're voting on the second part, which is the councillor congratulating Susan Lee. All those in favour? Anyone against? There's a division. I'm happy. Look, in the circumstances, I'm happy to support the force, because I think again, I think it's a fairly benign response now, and I think again it's just to congratulate her, which I've done. Councillor Stutchbury, you've got a question?
I have a question through you, Mr Mayor, to the General Manager. Is it possible for a councillor or a mayor to vote for and against the same motion in the same period of time?
Certainly is, Councillor Stutchbury, just as it's okay for someone to second a motion and speak against it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. So on that note, the motion is carried because I voted for the motion. Thank you, councillors. Next item of business, please. CM 11.1, minutes of the Audit Risk and Improvement Committee. Thanks, Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council receive, note and accept the minutes and recommendations of the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee meeting held on Wednesday 29th of May 2019.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, do you wish to speak to that at all?
Yes, briefly. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
No worries.
A couple of issues have come out of the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee, and the first one is that a review of the Audit Committee's charter will be carried out probably sometime in late August or early September, and that we're still waiting on the OLG to come up with some guidelines for ARICs, but that's come out of our meeting and we will do that. I guess the other matter I wanted to bring up was that there was a matter raised here publicly at a previous meeting relating to a possible conflict of interest regarding the Lavington Sports Ground grandstand and amenities building, where a potential conflict of interest was raised by a councillor against a member of the assessment panel. And council engaged Crowe Horwath to carry out a probity check, and that report was presented. ARIC has looked at it, and ARIC is satisfied that all correct procedures were followed in regard to that tender. The conflict of interest was found to be not to have occurred at all. The person who was a panel member had worked for the tenderer for a period of less than 4 months, and in a time period of more than 5 years ago. They had not worked in the Albury office, and they had no ongoing relationship. I found it a little unfortunate that was raised publicly, but the probity report has completely exonerated council and that staff member, and there are no ongoing issues.
Thank you, Councillor Thurlow. I too read that report, and you are correct. There appears to be no further issues. There being no further questions or debate, I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. I have 7.11.2, the minutes of the Public Library New South Wales Association meeting. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Another one of my committees. I move that council receive, note and accept the minutes and recommendations of the Public Library New South Wales Association meeting, South West Zone Group, held on Thursday the 30th of May.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, did you wish to speak to that at all?
Briefly again. It's interesting that there were 12 councillors and 16 staff and officers attending that meeting, so that's a pretty good roll-up. I guess one of the important factors was that the New South Wales government has announced funding of $60 million for public libraries over the next 4 years. That's a pretty welcome thing because they had cut it in previous years, so that was welcomed by all members present. One of the concerning issues, though, was that in some smaller libraries in smaller regional centres, Service New South Wales has been using the services of libraries to deliver services to customers. The problem is that while they use it and they pay a small fee, it's inadequate to staff the advice required. So people often use these services because they don't have adequate computer skills or home-based computers, and it consumes an enormous amount of staff time. Our council, our staff, our library staff have decided not to go there. In fact, we have Service New South Wales in Albury. But the other concerning trend is that the Commonwealth Government is also considering this to be a wonderful way of doing things, i.e. a wonderful way of shifting costs onto local government. So it's something that we need to be careful of and be concerned about. I'd also like to actually ask other councillors, being a member of this committee and ARIC, in fact, I'd appreciate any feedback from councillors as to what they would want me to bring to the attention of other committee members when I go to these meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. On that note, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Minutes of the Sustainability Advisory Committee on the Tuesday the 4th of June. Councillor Thurley.
As a traffic
Oh,
committee.
traffic. Oh, traffic. Traffic Committee, Thursday the 30th of May. Councillor Doxey. You weren't there? Councillor Stutchbury.
Before I before I move this, am I entitled to ask Mr Ferris a question?
You can move the motion first, then ask the question, but I believe Councillor Vanderman may have an amendment to the motion. Are you happy to...
Sure. Yep. I'll just could I move that the minutes of the Albury Local Traffic Committee meeting held on Thursday, 30th of May 2019 be confirmed, with the exception of LTC 4. I didn't see that in the printed thing. Matters dealt with prior to the Local Traffic Committee meeting 05/2019 Swift Street pedestrian safety movements.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury, do you wish to ask that question of Mr Ferris?
No, because I clearly didn't read my reports properly and I didn't see that the LTC 4 was being accepted.
Okay. Thank you. Did you wish to open debate on the item? The report,
yeah. No, there's nothing much to say about that meeting. The pedestrian issue was obviously the problem there. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, I'm happy to put that the minutes as they are with exception of LTC 4. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Councillor Vanderman, do you wish to raise the motion in relation to that?
Yes, an alternative motion to LTC 4 matters dealt with prior to the Local Traffic Committee meeting. I move that A, the council staff consult with RMS to create a pedestrian crossing in Swift Street in the vicinity of the proposed refuge. B, that extra car parking spaces be investigated outside the Library Museum to offset some of the car parking spaces lost to the crossing. C, that the local member be asked to intervene with RMS about retaining the funding for the project, even with the change of scope. And D, that a further report come to the Local Traffic Committee for decision.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman, do you wish to speak to it?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, for the opportunity. I've had discussions with Mr Ferris around this. I just wish to ask Mr Ferris a question through you, Mr Mayor, about the state of the funding for whatever treatment we get in Swift Street as far as a crossing or a refuge is concerned. What is the state of that funding and what is our opportunity to move it across to a pedestrian crossing rather than a refuge?
Mr Ferris.
Through you, Mr Mayor. The funding is a 50-50 funding under the Walking Communities program. For 18-19 we nominated the refuge. It was for a little bit over $30,000, so it was a $15,000 grant from RMS. Typically they need to be expended by the 30th of June. Sometimes we get an extension to the end of July. We have a similar program for 1920 where we've nominated some works in Union Road for around about $40,000, which would be split 50-50. So we can certainly go back to RMS and discuss the possibility of extending the current funding, the $15,000 over, or perhaps changing our priorities for the 1920 or we could self-fund once we've finalised a design for this project.
Councillor Vanderman.
Thanks for the answer. I don't have any follow-up, but I'll just continue speaking then to this issue. So I attended the, if you like, the community forum that was held around this, because there was some concern, even though initially nobody raised any issues around what was proposed, but obviously the local business people were concerned, and we had a public meeting which was attended by I think yourself and myself and a few of the businesses around there and council staff. The issue around the loss of car parking spaces was what was concerning of the business people, but there's a few issues that came to light on that night that I think the business owners are prepared to work with. One of them was that a lot of their employees were using those car parking spaces outside and leaving their place of work every couple of hours to go and move their cars. So on the basis of raising the issue that maybe we could change the parking time to 1 hour to provide a bigger turnaround of car parking spaces in that area, I think that there was an acceptance by the business owners that that might be a initial solution to the problem of losing it. So I think there's an acceptance. There's a few things that we could do. First of all, there's some plans in the foreseeable future to add a deck to the Wilson Street car park, and with that opportunity comes the opportunity to have a look at whether a second deck is feasible, an extra second deck is feasible from an engineering perspective. There was the issue around changing the 2-hour parking to 1 hour parking to provide a better turnaround for the businesses there, to provide more opportunities for people to visit businesses within that 1 hour time frame. But the other issue for me was the fact that I don't think the refuge is a very safe method of pedestrian crossing in the first place. And for the sake of some, if you like, consistency within the CBD, we have 4 pedestrian crossing at least that I know of in Dean Street that are a raised zebra type crossing. There's one further down in Swift Street, opposite where the, just near the Safeway, entrance to Safeway, or a bit before. There's actually a refuge there now, which is, I think it's totally unsafe in that area. But anyway, that's another issue. So I was told by the staff that the warrants, the pedestrian movements don't quite meet the warrants for a pedestrian crossing, but they do meet the warrants for a refuge. With the proposed redevelopment of the Albury Entertainment Centre, hoping to get more visitation there, extra car parking spaces, etc. in Wilson Street, unused car parking spaces in the Wilson Street area as well, and believing that within a short space of time those warrants would be met as far as the traffic counts across Smith Street. I felt that it was an opportunity to put a pedestrian crossing there in the first place for the sake of consistency, also to slow down the traffic in Swift Street, which is becoming a bit of a problem, and then so creating a better environment for those pedestrians wishing to cross Swift Street in that location. So that's the reason for this particular motion to have the item removed from the Traffic Committee, but letting the processes come back to the Traffic Committee for final decision before coming back to Council for approval. And I think it's a really good opportunity to have consistency in the way we deal with pedestrian crossings in our city. I believe that refuges are totally unsafe in my view, and if we're that close to meeting the warrants for a pedestrian crossing, let's do it now instead of having to revisit it in 2 years' time to change the refuge to pedestrian crossing. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Vanderman. Question from Councillor Conn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, please, to Mr. Ferris. My question is that if this version of the motion is passed tonight and we are unable to retain the funding for the original project because that proposed intervention is unsuccessful, what would happen to the funding for the project, or could the original project proceed?
Mr. Ferris.
You, Mr Mayor, I believe that if we were unsuccessful with having the funding either extended or reallocated from our 1920 budget, then the funding would be lost. However, that wouldn't mean that we couldn't consider other methods to fund it if other programs become available that met that criteria, and or, as discussed earlier, we could self-fund and we could put that through one of our quarterly reviews for council's consideration if that was the preferred treatment by the local traffic committee when we recommitted it to the local traffic committee.
Follow up?
Yeah, I suppose my follow-up question through you, Mr Mayor, is to Councillor Vanderven. I'm in support of what you're trying to achieve. I suppose my concern is that if we're unable to do this intervention and negotiation with RMS, we'll end up with no funding and no works on Striff Street, and we'll end up with the status quo, which is obviously not great for pedestrians. Would you consider an amendment that if these are unsuccessful, that we would proceed with the project as originally proposed?
Councillor Vanderven?
Look, I understand your concerns, but no, I wouldn't. I honestly believe that we should only just have a pedestrian crossing in that vicinity, understanding that the funding is 50-50 anyway with council. So I believe that from the discussions I've had with Mr Ferris, that there are plenty of opportunities for us to retain this funding in some form, and I personally would be supportive of self-funding the whole project if that funding was to disappear or be reallocated. So I don't want to see a refuge there. I think it's totally unsafe. I think we need to try and achieve a safe pedestrian crossing there that has two aspects to it. One, safety for the pedestrians, but also to slow down traffic in Swift Street, which is very much a part of our CBD. So I wouldn't be supportive of an amendment to say that we should do our refuge if this is unsuccessful. Thank you.
Follow up, Councillor Con?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My follow-up question is to Mr Ferris again. If we were to resolve, as Councillor Vanderven is suggesting, to self-fund a crossing at this point, are there any other design or permissions issues that could come up with RMS? Or if we resolve to put a crossing there, would we be able to do that and self-fund it?
Mr Ferris?
Through you, Mr Mayor, discussions last week with RMS was that they'd certainly consider a crossing, a formal crossing going there, even though it doesn't meet the warrants, because, as discussed by Councillor Vanderven, it is very close to those warrants, and they're now clarifying that they're not hard and fast as such. So we could certainly work through. I believe that if council go ahead with this motion, that we can realise a crossing in that location. Some of the changes from the current proposal would be around the scope of it would be lighting. So pedestrian crossings require a higher level of lighting on the approach side, and most of them have individual lighting. We would consider raising it for consistency across our CBD, like the other 5 or 6 throughout our CBD area there are raised. And we would then need to just look at how that fits in with the existing trees and the current drainage systems and things like that. But we would work through all of that as part of a design. I think if that's council's intent to build a crossing there, I believe from our feedback that we would get support from RMS.
Thank you, Mr Ferris. Councillor Vanderven, you spoke to your motion. There are no further questions or debate. I would just like to further add that I would speak for this motion on the basis that having been at the consultation and having listened to the questions and the concerns of the owners of the businesses, that there were a lot of good discussions had and a lot of compromises discussed, which again the hour parking was actually warmly accepted by them. But I also think, watching the traffic movements along there, that the traffic seems to exit the roundabout at Olive Street and accelerate at a rate of knots through that precinct. So a raised pedestrian crossing would slow that activity down and certainly provide a safer place for people to cross. So I, like Councillor Vandervan, do think that we're setting people up to fail if we put them in the middle of that refuge and they can't get through where they need to go. So I certainly do support the motion. Councillor Con, did you wish to speak for the motion?
I did, thank you, Mr Mayor, and notwithstanding my concerns about process, I wanted to thank Councillor Vandervan for bringing up an option that actually creates even better pedestrian safety than a refuge would have provided. I think it's a really important priority moving forward with our CBD as the city grows, that we look after pedestrians. The prospect of better lighting at that point actually sounds fantastic as well, given the expansion of the AEC and the fact that lots of people tend to cross there in the evening to attend concerts and the like at the entertainment centre. I think that would be a fantastic option. I'm very hopeful that this negotiation with RMS goes well, so we don't find ourselves back here in a couple of months. I certainly would support the original proposal over nothing, but hopefully we can see a pedestrian crossing in that site and it'll improve quality of the CBD.
Thank you. Councillor Vandervan, do you wish to close your...
No, thank you. Just to, obviously I hope that it meets the approval of our councillors.
Thank you. On that note, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you. Minutes of the Sustainability Advisory Committee meeting held on Tuesday the 4th of June. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council receive, note and accept the minutes recommendation of the Sustainability Advisory Committee meeting held on Tuesday the 4th of June 2019.
Thank you. Councillor Con.
Happy to second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, do you wish to speak to that?
Briefly, I'd like to note the service given by Rob Fenton, who's now resigned from our committee, and also he was a long-time member of the committee, and to Tim Wallace, who was served for a much shorter period of time, but another community member who was prepared to put up his hand and come in and help out. We have expressions of interest from others, so we are not going to be short of people on that committee. The members of the committee have also accepted that we meet monthly, considering a lot of important issues and sometimes quite complex ones, and so far that's working extremely well, and I think it's one of the better working committees of this council.
Thank you. On that note, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. The minutes of the Les O'Brien Athletics Precinct Advisory Committee meeting held on Wednesday the 5th of June 2019.
You can leave it on if you like. I move that Council receive, note and accept the minutes and recommendations of the Les O'Brien Athletics Precinct Advisory Committee meeting held on Wednesday the 5th of June 2019.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Thurley, do you wish to speak to that at all?
It was a very brief, short meeting, but basically, once again, a small group of very dedicated community members who put in their time and hard work to get good things happening in this city.
I see in the recent budget we have allowed funds for the terrace seating. Was that discussed at all at that meeting, Councillor Thurley?
Yes, it was, and they were very grateful to hear that that's going ahead. Whether or not we get the shaded component, that's another matter, but they were very happy that the terrace seating is there.
Excellent, thank you. On that note, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. The minutes of the Albury Airport Users Advisory Committee. Councillor Vandervan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council receive, note and accept the minutes recommendations of the Albury Airport Users Advisory Committee meeting held on Wednesday, 6th of June 2019.
Councillor Doxey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll second the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Vandervan.
I'm fine, thank you.
Thanks. On that note, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. We're up to officers' reports for consideration. 13.1, which is the acquisition of easement for proposed water main in Hannah Street. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council A waive clause 3.2A of the acquisition and disposal of land procedure due to the relatively low value of the easement. B, approves any documentation required to acquire an easement for water supply over the land known as Lot 2 in DP 1243057. C, approves payment of compensation of $11,000, including GST, for the easement, and D, approves payment of the owner's reasonable legal and mortgage costs to enable this acquisition.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
Second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Stutcher, I have a question from Councillor Conn. Do you wish me to take the question?
All right then.
Councillor Conn.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My question through you, please, to the relevant member of staff, who's probably Mr Ferris. I note that there's a very significant gum within that easement that's about 30 metres from the corner with Centaur Road. My question is not relating to the land acquisition, but more that in planning the future works here, has that been taken into account?
Mr Ferris.
Through you, Mr Mayor. Yes, certainly the design shows that majority of that stretch of Hannah Street will be underboard because there are a number of trees along there, so that will minimise any impact on any of the existing trees.
Councillor Conn, you look like you need a follow-up.
No, happy with that.
You happy with that? Oh, gosh, heavens to Betsy. Okay, Councillor Stutchbury, did you wish to speak to the motion?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Okay, no further question or debate. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. CM 13.2, provision of traffic management services panel contract. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council A accepts the tenders panel contract from Riverina Traffic Service Proprietary Limited, Complete Staff Services and Evolution Traffic Control Proprietary Limited for the provision of full service traffic management services, contract number 19/03480, provision of traffic management services 2019-2021 at an estimated value of $1,300,000 including GST, and B, accepts the tenders panel contract from Riverina Traffic Service Proprietary Limited and Game Traffic and Contracting for the provision of portable variable message signs, contract number 19/03480, provision of traffic management services 2019-2021 at an estimated value of $123,000 including GST.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, just to open debate.
No, thank you.
Thank you. There being no further question or debate, happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. 13.3, the draft investment policy and procedure review. Thank you. Councillor Thurley, your light's still on, I think.
It wasn't, but anyway. Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council A endorse the draft revised investment policy and procedure as presented to Council on the 24th of June 2019. B, place the draft revised investment policy and procedure on public exhibition for a period of 28 days. And C, if no submissions are received, that the draft revised investment policy and procedure be adopted and placed on the public policy and procedure register.
Thank you. A seconder, thanks. Councillor Vandervan.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, you wish to speak to that?
Only to say I think it's the culmination of a long saga of backwards and forwards between T Corp and ourselves, and I think we've come up with a pretty reasonable result.
Thank you. On that note, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Officer's report for noting. We have monthly development statistics. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Vandervan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council receive and note the information in the monthly development statistics report for May 2019.
Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Vandervan, do you wish to speak to that at all?
Just to say that it's still pretty healthy, those statistics from our perspective. If you benchmark these against other regional areas, I think we're doing very well. I did pass on to council staff a conversation from last week while I was on a course, and that was that some people that just invested in Albury. They were looking at other regional centres in New South Wales, but they were very complimentary, and that their criteria that they had, Albury ticked all the boxes. So that was very nice to hear. Especially as the person didn't have a clue as to who I was. Except to say that I was asked where I came from, and it was Albury, and he then started to tell me about his daughter investing in a rental property in Thurgoona. So I passed that on through you, Mr. Mayor, to the council staff to say that we're on in a good space as far as that's concerned. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vanderman. There being no further question or debate, happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against the motion is carried. CM 14.2, the Overseas Memorandum of Understanding 2019-2023. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that council receive and note the report.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
Yes, Mr Mayor, I'll second that.
Councillor Thurley, do you wish to speak to that at all?
I'd just like to say it's disappointing that this program and similar programs are not working as well as they could. But mostly I'd aim my criticism there at federal government, not just this one, but previous ones. We need a proper regional development policy for Australia. We don't have it. What we get is every time there's an election, there's some money chucked around to relocate a government department here, there or everywhere, and there's no consistent policies, and that is really holding back regional Australia. And EvoCities was an attempt to do something useful rather than this piecemeal approach. Oh, we'll stick the veterinary medicines thing up at Armidale, or we'll do this here or we'll do that there. It's sad that this has not worked out as well as it should have, but we need, as this council, to continue to push our governments to come up with better regional planning policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. There being no further questions or debate, I'd just like to add further to that, Councillor Thurley, that having been the chair of this group for 3 years, I think I do agree with you that there's been a shortage of state and federal funding for this particular initiative, and generally speaking, there's just a lot of lip service about how they're going to change the dynamic about regional growth, but there's no implementation of any programs or any incentivisation in New South Wales particularly, or federally across Australia. I think the Victorian government recently indicated that through Jacqueline Symes that they're withdrawing some of their funding across their regional portfolio as well. So that may be a sign of things to come in relation to their payroll tax discounts. But at the end of the day, the feeling is the government believes there's 4.5 million voters outside the major cities, and what do they count for really? And it's not one vote, one value. It seems to be about 5 to 1. If you're living in Sydney or Melbourne, you get more bang for your bucks. But I think this program, and our final meeting last fortnight ago, was very exciting, and certainly we got some metrics which would indicate that the program is exceeding its value and is actually doing more than the credit it's been given. And certainly even on the EvoJobs website, I think there was something like 3,500 people that have registered interest in areas and locations that are EvoCities waiting to find jobs. So, I mean, that to me is a considered view that it is working, but like everything else, what we're doing is reviewing its processes, maintaining the website to a point, and seeing whether there is any appetite for state or federal governments and or other cities to become involved. And I think that's really the legacy of this wonderful project. So thanks for your kind words, Councillor Thurley. I have a speaker for Councillor Vanderman.
I'd just like to make a few comments, Mr Mayor, if I can. All I'm doing at this stage is supporting the motion that Council receive and note the report. But I want to make a few comments because I've been involved with this EvoCities program since our former Mayor Arthur Fromfelder was involved with it in my first term on council, and I've been an enthusiastic supporter of the EvoCities with great justification, I believe, with the results that the EvoCities program has provided to this city, and I presume to other cities as well. And I must, at this stage, lambast our fellow councils in Wagga and Armidale for being so absolutely myopic and short-sighted to have voted to discontinue their involvement with EvoCities. Even those cities themselves, if there was an independent person extracting information as to how many residents that this particular program had attracted to those two regional cities, would probably take a step backwards and say, maybe you should reconsider. But understanding that, I enthusiastically support yours and our management's efforts to create an alternative structure to continue with what I see as has been a very successful resident attraction program to this city, and I thank you for your efforts in chairing that committee over the last 3 years. So, yeah, just note that I hope something sooner rather than later comes to fruition as far as putting something else in place, and also having an opportunity to discuss with our local member, both local members, about opportunities for co-funding programs of this nature, because having just recently visited Melbourne and wondering how those idiots put up with the traffic on a day-to-day basis makes me wonder why we can't get traction in getting people to move to, a regional city rather than living in that absolute joke with traffic. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Sydney's worst. Thank you, Councillor
Sydney's
Vanderman. But I'd like just to extend my congratulations to our staff, Tracy and her team, who have vigorously supported this particular project and actually have been great examples of how to do it properly. So, all right, on that note, I have to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. CM 14.3, the investment balances for May 2019. Councillor Vanderman, your light's still on?
Oh, well, in that case, I'll move that Council receive and note the investment balances report for month of May 2019.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury?
Well, in that case, I'll second it.
Councillor Vanderman, do you wish to speak to that?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. CM 15, I'll put that in motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. CM 15, the delegates' reports for noting. There aren't any. CM 16, Councillor Doxey, you had some urgent business.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As the President of the City of Albury RSL sub-branch, I'd like to make a presentation to AlburyCity for their generous support over quite a number of years, in particular the support that's provided for Anzac Day, because that is a large community event. And this year, Ros Walls, who teams up a small team that support this, said, best Anzac Day ever. That's high praise from Ros. So Ros has done a great job and we acknowledge that. But also David Armstrong has been working with our sub-branch over a number of months, giving us updates and presentations in relation to the work that's going to take place at the Albury War Memorial on Monument Hill. We're looking forward to that activity, and then continuing on looking at what we're going to do over the next couple of years for the World War II Bowl. So please, Mr Mayor, please accept this plaque that's presented in 2019 to the City of Albury in appreciation of your generous support, ongoing support.
Thank you, Councillor Doxey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Thurley, did your light come on then? Did you have any urgent business? No? Okay, thanks, Councillor Doxey. We have a confidential item, so we'll just...
Mr Mayor, I didn't have an item of
Councillor Vanderman.
that I did notify you of earlier.
Yep. Oh, there you go.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Can I ask if council staff can urgently provide us with an update on the unsuitable soils at the airport? It seems that we're finding ourselves once again in a situation where we're having to deal with this issue, and I'd like to be fully apprised of where we are and what our plans are for the future.
Thank you, Mr Zachnich.
Yes, happy to take that on notice and provide the information, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, you have...
The next item of the agenda, mate.
Okay, no worries. You happy with that, Councillor Vanderman?
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, let's move into confidential. Thank you, Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that we proceed into confidential on the basis that the matters and the information are the following: advice concerning litigation or advice that would otherwise be privileged from reduction in legal proceedings on the ground of legal professional privilege. Local Government Act 1993, number 30, section 10A, bracket 2, bracket G.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Okay, seconder is Councillor Stutchbury.
Yes, Mr Mayor, let's bring down the cone of silence.
I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you. We'll just formalise the motion. Yeah.
No, I mean, Arthur's joint on Wagga Road, no, North No, Mate Street would be the closest.
Get in on the ground floor, there's a chance.
Yep.
Someone said they put a post.
Thank you, councillors. Moving back into ordinary council at 7:11, and we will wish to formalise a motion of confidential discussion with 17.1, the Land and Environment Court Appeal, Namely Proprietary Limited versus Albury City Council. It was moved by Councillor Conn and seconded by Councillor Doxey. That council note the contents of the report and endorse option 1 regarding an update on the Land and Environment Court proceedings in Namely Proprietary Limited versus Albury City Council. The motion was put and carried. Thank you, councillors. On that note, meeting is closed at 7:12. Thank you.